We know that in today's world, building your digital brand is critical. In fact, a LinkedIn survey found that about 70% of professionals feel that having a strong personal brand is important for career success. And in a survey by Edelman, 64% of consumers said that they trust a company or a person more if they interact with them on a personal level. But building your digital brand isn't easy. It requires you to stand out from the noise and be authentic while growing your network. So to separate truth from fiction and signal from noise, we'll be chatting with someone I've had on the podcast before. More on that in just a moment. Hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast. I'm Vinay Koshy and our guest today is Kylie Chown. Kylie, great to have you back. You've probably increased your resume, so to speak. You've got a number of accomplishments. I'll try and pick out a few. You are Australia's first certified social media crisis advisor, a LinkedIn and social media strategy trainer. You're also LinkedIn certified marketing insider, as awarded by LinkedIn. You've been a mentor or coach of the year in the marketing, public relations, and social media space, and won the Stevie Awards in 2021 and 2022. You've also been awarded the best use in LinkedIn by the Social Media Marketing Institute in 2021, certified as a social branding analyst by Reaching USA, and of course, co-authored the book Connect, Leverage Your LinkedIn Profiles, Business Growth and Lead Generation. Perhaps the one that I should mention is the fact that you are the number 2 LinkedIn expert for the Asia Pacific region as well. Kylie, when you started off helping people build out their brands on LinkedIn and perhaps on a wider scale, has the problem that you were addressing initially changed to what it is today?
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. That was great. And thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here again. And it's always great to chat to you. I think so. So I think people have always been conscious of their digital brand and their digital reputation. But what I've found is more so since COVID, where we had a lot of activity that was face to face, that went online.
Mhm.
As a result of that, I think during that period and now subsequently post that period, your digital first impression is now more important than ever. So I think the essence of the problem has remained the same, but I just think it's been amplified due to COVID and the subsequent activities after it. And I guess if I even think about how I engage service providers, if I'm looking for a product or a service, the very first thing that I'll do is jump onto Google and I'll try and find that business or that brand or that individual. And I guess where LinkedIn comes into play is because it's so big and it's essentially a big database, is that people's LinkedIn profiles will typically come up first in those search results. So it's just making sure that digital first impression and what comes through LinkedIn is really aligned with individuals, their business, and their brand.
Makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious though, with trying to build out your profile and certainly your online presence, there is, as I said in the introduction, this idea of ensuring that you're building trust and building out your reputation as well as brand awareness. How would you recommend people approach that in what is a very noisy world that we live in?
Yeah, I think this can be really challenging for people, particularly because they've got to, particularly for individuals where they need to write about themselves. Yeah, I typically find that they're challenged with that. So I guess if they're starting out and if people are starting out, there's a few steps that I would encourage them to take. So the first one is get really clear on who you're talking to and who your audience is. And it's very similar to traditional product marketing. But if we know who our audience is and who we're talking to, we can then speak in a way that aligns with them, their problems, and how you as a service provider can help solve those problems. So I think if we get really clear on who we're talking to, and then secondly, what the purpose is for LinkedIn. So for some people, they'll use LinkedIn as a business development tool. So their purpose is leads converting to sales. There'll be people who use LinkedIn for different reasons. Maybe they want to get their content into media, publications, and things like that. There'll be people who use LinkedIn as a brand awareness activity. I think if we know who we're talking to and what our purpose is, then that makes the next steps a lot easier. What I also find too is that people are typically underselling themselves on LinkedIn. So I'll talk to people and I'll be like, "You're amazing. You've got some they'll have great experience. They would have done great work for their clients." But when I look at them online, there's a disconnect. And for, I would say, 98% of people who I talk to, it's their online presence is actually underselling them. And the challenge with that is that people will meet them online before they meet them in person. So leading from that, I think it's overcoming the challenges of putting yourself online and writing about yourself and just thinking about, are you presenting yourself in the best possible way that's going to align with how you actually help your clients and the work that you actually do? And it might be writing something and then getting someone you trust to review it and give you feedback. You could look at doing peer reviews and things like that. Because like I said, I think the majority of people are actually underselling themselves through their profiles. I think to answer your question is get clear on the audience, get clear on what you want to use LinkedIn for, and then make sure that your profile is really accurately representing what you're doing and not underselling yourself.
That's an interesting idea. This underselling.
Mm.
What would be? I'll use the word symptoms. What would be symptoms of underselling yourself?
That's a really good question. So typically what I see when people are underselling themselves is that their profile will be very historic. So it'll be focused on what they've done previously and not focused on what they're doing at the moment. When they're underselling themselves, they might not be including all their achievements. If they have been nominated for or won awards, they might not be getting client recommendations. So their great strategy on LinkedIn is getting clients to leave clients recommendations. So, they're not reaching out to their clients or contacts and asking for recommendations once they've finished those engagements. They might not be sharing content. So they're underselling themselves when they're not sharing their expertise and their insights and providing advice in the area of their expertise. I think in summary, it's very much, I'll look at those type of profiles. It'll be, like I said, very historic around what they've done previously and also potentially lacking in that social proof concept, recommendations and social proof through sharing their insights through content.
Mhm. With this idea of filling out your profile, I'm assuming that it's a good idea to know what your strengths are and
Ah,
focus on that to highlight those. I see nodding, so I think you agree. I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal areas?
I think that's changed over time. And I think that's similar for a lot of people is that they'll start off with a particular area of strength and then evolve through their journey as they go through their business. For me, I think initially it was that technical area. So I'm quite technically focused. So I think initially that was very much underpinning my strength in the LinkedIn space. So knowing the platform really well and the technical aspect of it. As I've worked with more people, I think that's still there, but it's also evolved to really helping people get comfortable with the platform and working with clients so that they feel comfortable and confident to be able to use the social tools to help them build out that digital first impression. Because at the end of the day, these people are amazing. They're great skills, great experience. It's not that they're lacking in that. It usually the confidence and being comfortable to put themselves out there. So I think as my business has changed and I've worked with more people, it's moved into that space a bit more.
Mhm. And from a business point of view, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
Well, that's a good question. What's something that businesses don't know but should? I think from a business perspective, if we think about content, I think businesses should know that less than 3% of people are consistently creating and sharing content on LinkedIn. So I think if you know that statistic and you know that data point, by knowing that, I think highlights the opportunity to be able to share your content, share information, provide advice and share insights. So I think if businesses realize that there are a lot of people on LinkedIn who are consuming content and not necessarily engaging, and I think that works two ways. Clients will say to me, "Oh, I put out content," but they might not get the engagement that they expect or the engagement that they get on other platforms. But it's what happens after that. So it's looking at, do you have people requesting connection with you? Do you have people sending you messages and inquiries about your service? So I think understanding that not everyone on LinkedIn actually, a very small portion of people on LinkedIn are actually creating content. I think if they knew that, they would understand the opportunity on both sides, both through a content creation perspective and also through the perspective of if you're not getting the engagement, that's okay because people aren't necessarily on there creating and engaging, but they are definitely consuming. And I've
Mhm.
had situations where I met a lady at an event in Brisbane and she was talking to me and I couldn't, so I don't know who she is. So, and I was trying to think, where do I know her from? And I couldn't, and I was like, oh, I'm going to have to say something. So like said to her, oh, I'm really sorry, but I can't remember where we've met before because she was speaking to me in such a familiar way. And she's like, oh no, we haven't met. I've just been following and reading your stuff. And then when I looked back, yeah, she had never engaged with anything. She had never commented on anything. She had never liked anything that I had put out. But when I met her in person, like I said, I was at an event, she came up to me. Um, she was so familiar with me just through that content journey, but I wouldn't have any indication of that through my content engagement. Mm.
Certainly. That's a brilliant example. But I'm curious because we probably have a few people who are very much numbers focused,
Yeah.
if not them personally, certainly the nature of the business, the pressures on there causes them to be very much focused on numbers. They might be going, that sounds nice, but we've got to show the numbers to the board, etc. How would you speak to them about certain metrics that we could look at in order to ensure we are getting, we're moving in the right direction or tracking the
Mhm.
right direction in terms of reach as well as overall engagement
Mm.
beyond
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
likes and
Yeah.
comments that we get on posts?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that, that the data is really important and the metrics are really important. With LinkedIn, particularly on company pages, there is a lot of great data available to you from things like your followers, your content. You can even set up a competitor analysis in that. So, what I would say to that is when I'm working with clients, typically I'll work with them across three metrics, particularly if they've got a content strategy. So, if I go back one step, the purpose or one of the purposes of the content strategy is to help move people through those buying stages. If we look at a buying stages model, we'll start with and the terms will be interchanged depending on what model you're looking at. But typically there's an awareness space. So we've got awareness and then consideration and then decision. So from my perspective, I like to look at metrics across those three elements. So as an awareness metric, then I'm looking at things like your company page following, but also breaking that down and looking at those followers and identifying if they are in fact your ideal audience. So you can have amazing numbers in your followers, but if it's not who you're targeting, you're not going to get the most out of it. So my first metric would be an awareness metric. And that's where I'd look at, like I said, your company page followers of a personal profile that translates to your followers and or your connection. So how many people are aware of you? At that can the next metric I would look at with businesses and individuals would be their consideration metric. So that how many people are considering them and what does that look like? In that sense, I'm looking at your content engagement rate. So not necessarily how many likes or how many people are commenting, but how that translates into a percentage. So then we can measure that moving forward. So it would be things like, yeah, your content engagement rate. And we want to see that increasing. And then the third thing I would look at with people is their decision metric. So that's people taking an action that you want them to take. So it could be measuring things like people sending you an inquiry through LinkedIn. It could be a message that you get in your inbox asking for more information on your services. If you're promoting an event, whether it's a live event or an online event. It can be a registration for that event. It can be on your company page. If you've got the contact us form set up, it could be how many people have filled out that form. So I think we need to, from my perspective, is look at those three things because they all need to work together. So if you're not getting those decisions or you're not meeting that decision metric, typically it's not really an issue with that. It's usually something higher up that's feeding through. So from that perspective, I think we need to look at all three of those things.
So do you just go off the metrics that the LinkedIn platform provides, or do you use an external service to gain an overall perspective of how things are tracking?
Yeah. So from my perspective, because I'm in creator mode, I actually have creator mode. One of the advantages of one of the benefits of being in that is that it does provide you more detailed analytics. From my perspective, I'm actually just going in and having a look at those and I'm recording it that way. From a company page perspective, it's really about going into the analytics on the company page. And I can then go in and actually export that data into a CSV file that then I can use for reporting purposes.
Okay. Company page is an interesting one, at least in my mind, because I don't know about most other people, but I don't place too much of value or go looking for company pages per se. I'd rather look at an individual. And
Mm.
I think at least some statistics certainly point to that direction as well. So I'm curious, I can understand that the necessity of having a company page to keep your brand strategy in line, etc. But from a business point of view, other than having a company page on the LinkedIn platform, how would you encourage people to seek it out when appropriate? Because not everyone's going, I need to look at the company page on LinkedIn as
Mm.
opposed to going directly to the website and checking out their about section, say.
Mm. Yeah, great question. So I think it depends on a couple of things. I think, first of all, it depends on the company and the business. So with larger organizations, I think a company page is necessary because it's more about brand awareness or awareness type content channel. I think regardless, everyone should, like you said, claim their company page. And the main reason being is that with the URL, there's only one of those. So you want to claim that URL for your business just so no one else does and you've got that. So even if you don't use it, I would suggest people set it up and claim their page for their business. I literally had a client 2 weeks ago who they have a sub business and they shared with me when they went to set up the company page, one of their competitors had actually already set one up. And she was like, what do I do? And I was like, no, it's going to be challenging to be able to get that back. And they're working through channels to be able to do that. But that's something that people can avoid if they claim it themselves. Going back to your question, the necessity of a company page, again, I think it depends on the business and the strategy.
Mm.
Businesses who are larger will typically engage a company page. I think also if you're looking at things like recruiting new people, looking at your staff development, retention, and you want to attract people to your business, I think a company page can be really key in that because you can showcase what it's like to work at the company, the behind the scenes, and give that insight that you won't necessarily get through the personal profile. But I absolutely agree with you. People want to engage with people, not necessarily brands. So I think leading with the individual profiles is beneficial. But in some instances, I do think having that company page to support can be beneficial as well. But again, it all comes down to your resources. There's so many things that you could do on LinkedIn. And it's really just identifying which activities are going to give you the most benefit for your time, for your effort, and for your attention.
That makes sense. We've talked a little bit about the recommendations and the things of that nature. I would imagine that it would be useful both on the company page as well as on your personal profiles. One of the issues I think for most people is that you can certainly request a recommendation.
Mhm.
I believe that's still available on LinkedIn. The issue is the nature of the testimonial or recommendation that's left. Most people would probably provide something that's fairly generic. And from a brand perspective, it doesn't really lend to the overall purpose of what you're trying to achieve. I'm curious, are there tips or recommendations that you would make in that regard to try to ensure that some of these recommendations are at least more on point and speak to the issues that you're trying to solve with your customers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think recommendations are a really key part of a LinkedIn strategy. For myself, I'll use recommendations obviously on my LinkedIn profile, but I'll also use them in things like if I do a proposal, I'll find relevant testimonials and use them in there. I might use it as part of my content strategy. I might include them if I'm doing a presentation. For me, that getting those recommendations is valuable because, like I said, I use it across different elements of my business.
Mhm.
But I guess the flip side of that is exactly what you're saying. They can be A, sometimes a bit challenging to get, and B, sometimes you're not necessarily getting the message across that you want to be getting across. So to mitigate that, what I do with people is I'll actually ask them off LinkedIn. So if we've, for example, done a training session, at the end of that session, I would say to them, and if they're sharing feedback, I would say to them, look, I'd really appreciate or I'd love it if you could do a LinkedIn recommendation for me. Would that be okay? So once they agree offline, then I can give some direction into where I want to go. And I might say to them something like, I've really enjoyed training with your team and I'd love to work with more people like you. I'd love a recommendation maybe where we talked about a particular aspect of it. So it might be the delivery, it might be the content. And look, I guess I just have a bit of a discussion with them about it. But I think the key is asking them offline to be able to communicate that. Once they've agreed, then what I'll do is I'll implement the process through LinkedIn. So then going to their profile, requesting a connection, sorry, requesting a recommendation from them. And when I do that recommendation request, I'll reinforce what we've talked about. So I might say something like, hi, thanks so much for agreeing to leave a recommendation. Love for you to be able to share your experience around our team training, just to give them some direction in where to go with it. Because what I find without that is that people will want to give you a recommendation, but they don't know what to do and they don't know what to say and they're not sure what to write. So then sometimes it can become a bit too tricky and it falls off the priority. So I think being able to provide support to people who are you want a recommendation from, A, puts it more on brand, but also helps them and makes the process easier from their perspective.
Mhm. Makes a lot of sense. Would you recommend the use of to help them through the process once you've had that offline discussion?
Yeah, look, if someone asked me, I would, but not so much a template, might be more a framework.
Okay.
And I would talk them through, okay, so maybe we could talk about before what was happening. So say before working with me, this was the situation. During, so then we would talk about what I did. So it might be I came on site and delivered some training, and then what the result of that was. As a result, this has happened. Now, sometimes that can be a bit challenging for the person writing the recommendation because they might not necessarily want to expose the challenges that they had in their business. So it's being able to work with them on something that they're comfortable with. And again, it's because I'm having it as a conversation,
Mm.
I can engage how that's going. So if they're coming across as this is going to be a bit tricky or this is going to be a bit challenging, then I can offer some additional support for them to be able to do that.
Mm. We've touched upon content, and I'm curious. There is an awful lot of content that would appear on people's LinkedIn feeds. Looking at that, especially for someone who probably hasn't published very much or anything of late, it can be a bit daunting.
Mm.
How would you recommend that we approach this whole content strategy? Obviously, we need to be talking about things that we're involved with and are focused on through our business. Um, but is there more to the overall strategy
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
using content?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. I think, first of all, as we discussed at the start, knowing what your purpose is and who your audience is.
Yeah.
To write your profile, that's also going to translate into your content strategy. If people are starting out, I would encourage them to think about 3 areas of expertise that they want to be known for. That's something that might change and evolve as they go as well. But for me at the moment, I can tell you mine is my 3 areas that I want to be talking about are LinkedIn, digital first impression, and community. The reason I've got community is I co-host a LinkedIn local event. So that sits under the community pillar. So I think once people know, okay, these are the things I want to be talking about, it narrows their focus and helps them develop that content strategy. The next thing I would say is that LinkedIn likes you to be consistent. So sometimes I see people, they get really enthusiastic and they're going to do content and they'll do amazing content for 2 weeks. And then they might get busy or things come up and it will drop off. So I would encourage people to set an objective that's reasonable. And if you're just starting out, once a week's okay. Once a week is one a week more than what you were doing before. So if that's something that you can manage, start with that and then build from there. If someone's really new to LinkedIn and they're logging in and they're looking at the newsfeed and they're, okay, I've got to put some content out and they're not sure where to start, I would step back. And if people are very new, I just start with saying, hey, just start by liking stuff. So go through, see things that you enjoy reading and that you like, and just start liking stuff. And then once you get comfortable with that, then you might make a comment. So then you might add your comments and your thoughts to other people's posts. And this is helping you just get comfortable with the platform.
Yeah.
Once you're comfortable with that, then I might share with them, find something that you can share that someone else has written. So it might be something from an authority news site. It might be something that someone else has written that aligns in one of your 3 topics. Share that and then put some thoughts around why you're sharing that. And then once you get comfortable with that, then you can look at doing your own post. And by going through that process, it's allowed you to engage with other people's content, get comfortable, see what other people are doing. And then I think that becomes a lot easier then to start posting your content. Once you get comfortable with that, then you can look at doing your things like LinkedIn articles, LinkedIn newsletters, and things like that. If I'm talking to someone who's very new to LinkedIn and I say to them, write an article, they're going to go, no way. Or if they say yes, I don't think they're going to do it because it's just too much of a step. So I encourage people just to take the next step, look at where you are and what's the next thing that you can do and work on building that. And as you get more comfortable and more confident, it will become a lot easier for you.
Uh, you make some great points there. I'm also aware that people may do some content on some other platform, be it a
Mhm.
blog or a newsletter, etc. How can we look at what we're already doing
Mm.
and repurpose it or modify it slightly in order not to get into this frenzy of producing new content for every platform, but to have streamline some of our workflows?
Yeah, I love that. That's something that I like to do. I don't like having to do more than what we need to. So I think particularly that concept of having a theme for a particular period is beneficial because I could go, okay, in November, I'm going to be talking about, say, for example, social media policy. If that's what I'm going to be talking about, I could first of all write an article for that. And that article could go to my email list. It could go on LinkedIn as a LinkedIn article on my blog site. So I've got this one central theme and one central message in a longer form copy format. But then from there, I can actually break that down for individual posts. And this is something that I'll do myself through my articles. I might say 5 reasons why you need a social media policy. And then each of those reasons can be a independent post. Or I can take those 5 reasons and create a carousel post out of it. Or I could jump on and do a video about it. So I'm taking my central message and I'm just presenting it in different ways. If we think about how people take in information, it's different depending on their individual learning styles. So some people love reading long form articles. Some people prefer audio. Some people prefer the images in the shorter format. Sometimes people will say to me, but why people like get sick of seeing the same thing? And I don't think that they do because you're presenting it in different ways. So the person who loves audio might not be the person who sits down and reads that long form article that you wrote. The person who loves a short, sharp image and short copy, they'll engage with those type of posts. But again, they might not listen to audio because of their environment or it's not how they take in information. I think absolutely look at how we can reuse content and how we can use what we're already doing. So we're not creating things, we're not always having to create things. I think an extension of that is document what you're doing on an annual basis. So this is something that I'll do with clients as well. Particularly if they're starting out, we'll document what we've talked about it in each month, what's done particularly well. So then in the next year, they can go back and go, okay, cool. This is what we talked about last year. Is it still relevant? What can we reuse out of what we've already got? Like for myself in January, I do an article, which is, does your LinkedIn profile need a reboot for the new year? I've literally done it probably for the last 4 or 5 years. And no one's ever said to me, you did that last year, because A, if they've seen it, they've forgotten. B, I've had new people come into my network over that period of time. C, they might have seen it, but it not be relevant to them at that time. From my perspective, I've got content for January based on what I've done previously because I know it's topical. I know people engage with it. The fact that I used that before, I don't believe has a negative impact on how I use it moving forward.
Mhm. Brilliant. So we've got this whole idea of content strategy and this idea of making life simpler through repurposing and curation as well. I'm curious, are there specific objectives we should be looking at with each of the pieces of content that we publish? Is that another factor you look at when doing up your overall content plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier we talked about the buying stages that people will go through.
Mhm.
And for the purpose of today, using the terms awareness, consideration, and decision. We talked about particular metrics that align to that. I also think then that your content strategy needs to align to that. So at the awareness stage, I'm providing a lot of educational content. That might be articles I've written myself. That might be sharing other people's articles and putting my insights around it. But I'm making people aware of what I do through my content. In the consideration stage, I'll use a different content media, different content formats, and different content messaging. So there I might be sharing, for example, testimonials, customer feedback. I might share more targeted tips to a particular audience. And then for a decision metrics, that's where I'll include a call to action. But when I say that, it's not necessarily saying, hey, buy something. It's, for example, earlier I said under community, the reason I've got that is we've got a LinkedIn local event. So that'll be, hey, we've got an event coming up. If you're interested, here's the link. So then I'm getting them to make a decision. The type of content that I do. So if we think of this buying stages as an upside down triangle, I want to balance it in that way. So I want to have the most awareness content, then next consideration content, and lastly, decision content. The risk is, I think, is when we've got it flipped and you're sharing a lot of wanting people to make a decision and they flip the upside down triangle to be the right side of the triangle. But they're the type of it's the type of content that's always promoting something, wanting people to take action and things like that. And I think if we do too much of that, people will tune out to it and you start to move away from this objective to position yourself as an authority expert advisor in a particular area.
Well, I know content is certainly one of the more common challenges that people
Mm.
have to work through in order to build their digital brand. But I'm curious, are there other issues that the businesses need to factor in as they look at building up their digital brand? If so, what would they be?
I think that depends on the size of the organization and the size of the business. Different businesses will have different challenges they need to address. Smaller businesses, one of the challenges is that they build their digital brand and their digital presence around them as an individual. And then when they go to scale, that can be a bit tricky because their brand's been all built around a person if their objective is to scale it. If it's a organization or a business that has team members, challenges around that, looking at how those team members are representing the business and the brand. And it's looking at, in those instances, things like, okay, do you have a social media policy for your team? So that if
Yeah.
someone in your team engages in a digital way that's not appropriate, you can bring them back to a policy discussion. So you can say, hey, we've got a social media policy in place and this activity didn't align with that. So I think once we start bringing more people into the mix, that can be challenging because everyone's individual. And without having that policy or that framework, it becomes an opinion which is subjective. Reasonably, what I think is appropriate could be totally different from what you think. And that's okay, just because we've got different backgrounds and different experiences. But from a team perspective, that can be a bit risky
Mhm.
because you can cross over what's not appropriate. But like I said, bringing it back to a policy and having those frameworks in place where we have social media policy, where we have team member training, where we have processes can mitigate a lot of that, those challenges.
Would you say that this policy development would or should be an extension of the overall culture of the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk to businesses and I'll ask them, do they have a social media policy? And they might say, oh, it's in our code of conduct or it's in our onboarding documents as part of a different policy. And to me, that says that they are trying to tie it to the organizational vision, mission, culture, behaviors. But I still think we need to have it as an independent process and an independent document. And again, it's knowing what your culture is and how you want people to align with that. Also, using it as part of an onboarding and offboarding process. So when new team members join the business, you can be saying to them, hey, we use social media. LinkedIn is our primary platform. And these are the type of things that we're doing. And even a step back is looking at those discussions at that interview stage, if it's appropriate, if it is a big part of your strategy, seeing that the people who are coming into your organization, particularly in those executive roles and business development focused roles, that they're aligning with what your objectives are.
Hmm. I'm also aware that you're a social media crisis advisor. I'm curious, would most companies have looked at LinkedIn as a means to navigate through a crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think you've got your strategy for crisis management, and then you've also got your platforms to take your strategy to market. And this is not dissimilar to a sales strategy, to a business development strategy. You've got the strategy and then you've got the tool to take your strategy to market. A lot of businesses, depending on the nature of their incident, will use LinkedIn as part of that management process, particularly if they're in a business where their audience is on LinkedIn. And because of that, the fact that LinkedIn is more of that professional space. And what I mean by that is if we think of the other platforms, if we think about Facebook and Instagram, for example, when we go to them with a different mindset, with a different intention. So I know if I'm on Facebook, I'm there more to see what my family is doing, what my friends are doing. If I'm on Instagram, it's more to look at beautiful places I might go on holidays and things like that. So I'm in a different mindset. At this point in time, LinkedIn is really the only platform that's been established from that more professional space where people go with that work perspective, with that work lens. I think because of those reasons, businesses will use LinkedIn as the tool to get their strategy or their crisis response to their marketplace.
Mhm.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's certainly it makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine the company page would be a key linchpin
Mm.
to the whole process. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
and well, that's terrific. I'm curious though, as you work with people through this whole idea of building their digital brands, is there a kind of a framework? And I'm thinking more in terms of the overall experience that they get, as opposed to the tactical and strategic perspectives. Is there something about the whole experience that you're trying to deliver that you boil down to a set of principles or a framework? If so, could you talk us through it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the three things that we need to look at from a framework perspective is first of all is the profiles, then it's the activity, and then it's the connections and conversation. So we've talked about profile today from different aspects. I think having those profiles right is really key. So that personal profile and the company page. We can have amazing personal profiles, but if we're not bringing people to them and having people see them, they're not going to get the best that they can get. So then that leads us to the second thing, which is the activity. So what are you doing on LinkedIn? And again, we've touched on that from a content perspective. What content are you sharing? Are you sharing your advice? Are you sharing your insights? The third thing is the connections and the network. And we haven't really discussed that in a lot of detail today. But again, that looking at who you're reaching out to, are you proactively developing your network? How are you engaging with people who connect with you? So, what's the network and the conversations like? I think for a strategy to be successful, it does need to have all those three elements working together because without one of them, it's going to be deficit. So, great profile, great content. But if you haven't proactively built out your audience, then it's not going to get as much visibility as it could. You could have a great audience and be sharing great content, and people, wow, this is amazing. Go to your profile and go, oh, okay, this is not what I thought I was going to get. So you'll get the disconnection there. You can have the profile and the network, but not sharing the content. That will also lead to a gap as well because people will be connected to you. But if you're not sharing content, they're not going to get that visibility of you. And even if they do, I think a lot of people now can actually or realize they can go and see all activity and see what you're writing and see what you're sharing. You're not going to project the depth of experience that you actually have. So I think from a framework perspective, it's really those three things working together. It's the profile, the content, and the connections or the network.
And with the connections, would you recommend that we proactively stick to ideal customer profile, or should we be a little more open-minded and
Mm.
entertain conversations regardless of the industry or the backgrounds that
Mm.
they have?
Yeah, good question. I think that's different for different people. And I think that depends on your particular comfort level and also your particular strategy as well. So personally for me, I'm quite open to connecting with people, even if they don't fall out of that profile, because I don't know who else they're connected to.
Mhm.
And I don't know why they're connecting with me. So even though it might not be obvious, there might be something there that I'm not seeing. So I think it depends on your strategy and your comfort level. For me, I like to, for example, I like to connect with people who are also in my space because I can learn things from them. Like they share great content too. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Or that's a different, or it might challenge me to think about it in a different way. Again, I wouldn't have got visibility of that if I was saying I'm only going to connect with people who are ideal clients. The flip side of that is if I do, or if someone does connect with someone and they're like, turn out to be not the type of connection that you want, you can actually disconnect with them. So even though you're connecting with them, you don't have to stay connected with them if that's not the path you want to choose. You can disconnect from them. They don't get a notification of that. You can block them as well. If they were then to search for you, they can't find your profile. From my personal perspective, I'm quite open with who I accept connection requests from. But absolutely, I know people and I talk to people and I literally talked to a lady last week and she said the same thing. She said to me, oh, I only connect with people once I've met them. Is that okay? And I'm like, if that's right for you, then absolutely that's okay. And you might change that down the track, but it's all about getting comfortable. So if you're at this point in time, just comfortable with connecting with people, just start with that. But then down the track, you might go, okay, cool. I feel a bit more comfortable with this and expand it. Like I said, I'm quite open to connecting with people I don't know because I don't know why they're connecting with me. I don't know who they're connected to. And I don't know what I want to, I don't know what their motivation is until we make that connection.
Mhm. Brilliant. And I think we've covered a fair bit of ground, but I'm curious, are there perhaps a couple of aspects to this idea of building out a digital brand that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
Mm. I think it is getting talked about more and more. So I think that's a good thing. I think some of the aspects that don't get talked about is when things don't really go to plan. And that might not necessarily be from something you've done or the team members done. It could be something that's outside of your control. So it could be someone putting a comment on a post that you're not entirely comfortable with. It could be someone challenging you in a way that you're not entirely comfortable with. I think it's understanding is if we take an action and put something online, there's going to be a response, and it's one of three things. So it's going to be a positive response. So you'll put something out and people will engage with that and give you positive engagement and feedback. That's one response. The second response is a neutral response. They'll go, oh yeah, cool, keep on going. So it's no response is a response. The third response is having a negative response. So that's where someone will, like I said, challenge what you're writing, maybe write something that's not complimentary. And I don't necessarily think that gets talked about a lot because people don't want to, they find that a little bit challenging. And I
Mm.
guess it's understanding what to do in those situations and having a plan around it. And again, I like the idea of having a process and a policy. So that's something that would fall under a social media policy. Um, with feedback, again, you can categorize that negative feedback into three categories. It could be genuine feedback. So someone might respond and their feedback might be genuine. You might be, okay, fair point. How you respond to that is going to be different to someone who does spammy type of content comments, to someone who's doing kind of threatening, more serious comments. And I think having a response ready in each of those situations allows you, when those things happen, to be able to go, okay, cool, I'm just implementing my process. I literally had a client here the other day, they put out a post. She got some comments on it, which were not very nice comments. And it wasn't directed at her. It was about the content in the post. I'm like, cool, what did you do? And she's, oh, I know what to do. I did this screenshot, so capture it. So she's got a data point if it's something that's ongoing, and she's going to delete them. I'm like, cool, done, move on. So it's knowing what to do in those situations and thinking those through. So when they do happen, you've got a plan and a process. I'll add one more thing to that, which is I find on LinkedIn, this doesn't actually happen that much because people are becoming hopefully more aware that it is very in line with their brand and their business. And is this what I want associated with my business? And they tend to come from that perspective a bit more. So I do find from that side, we tend to see a little bit less than what we might see on other.
To me, it underscores the absolute need to be very clear about the culture of the organization,
Absolutely.
which would again inform your crisis policy. Great points there, Kylie. To wrap things up, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I think this going back to that principle of understanding that people will meet you online before they meet you in person. So what I would encourage people to do is take that customer journey for themselves. So jump onto Google, put your name in, see what comes up, put your business name in and see what comes up. And it might sound elementary, but when you look at it through that customer lens, it can be quite insightful. It might be great. You might go, amazing. I love it. It's exactly how I want it to be. But you might also identify opportunities where you can improve that. Because what happens is that people will bounce off and you won't even know. I can look up a business, I can look up an individual. And if I don't perceive it as being able to meet what I'm after, I'll just bounce off and go and look at someone else. But you don't know that's happening. And people, yeah, they don't, you won't, there's no, you won't, you don't know that's happening. So I think, yeah, my one kind of takeaway would be understanding that people learn about you online before they meet you in person. Engineering that process so you're aware of it, identifying opportunities to improve it. And absolutely, you can take measurement of this. I had a client came to me and said They had no LinkedIn presence. They had an amazing business. They had no company page, no key team members on LinkedIn in a way that accurately represented what they're doing. And I had a really interesting conversation with them. And I said to them, "Oh, why haven't you done why haven't you what's been the barrier of doing this activity?" And they said to me, "Oh, we're a referral business. So we get lots of," they were in professional services. "We get a lot of referrals. We're a referral built business." And I was like, "Oh, okay. So what's changed? So why are we having this conversation now?" And the individual there shared with me, he said, "I went to a networking event and someone said to me, 'Oh, I was referred to you and I looked you up, but there was nothing there. So I went and I went and found someone else.'" And for him, that was really like, "Oh, wow. Okay. People are bouncing off my profile." Even though they were getting referrals, once they did that work. And I said to them, "Capture it now because I'd love to see what that uptake is once we've done this project," which was great for them because their incoming referrals actually did increase. But the cool thing is that they didn't have to do any more work because they were getting them
Yeah.
anyway. What was happening online was just helping that conversion. So also understanding your digital footprint is really working for you 24/7. So it's getting it right. And then the results will come off that without necessarily needing a whole lot of updates and changes.
Mhm. Absolutely. Brilliant. And if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend that they head?
So you might be surprised. I'm going to say LinkedIn. It's probably the best place to find me and connect with me. Like I said, I'm quite open to accepting connection requests. If someone did want to find me there, they're absolutely welcome to connect and maybe just put a note on that they've come to the podcast. And if they have any questions or if something wasn't clear today, absolutely welcome any questions that they have as well.
Okay. Well, we'll release that in the show notes. Kylie, thank you so much for doing this. It's been terrific.
Thank you so much for having me back and I appreciate being here. Have a great day.